Darcy Gaechter, welcome to the Art of Adventure.
Thanks, Derek. It's great to be here.
My pleasure, and I'm excited. This is we're going to talk about running your Amazon experience, your trip, the first woman to fully run the length of the Amazon in a kayak. Actually, part of the expedition, the first people in kayaks. Other people have done it in rafts or walking and things like that. And maybe you could just take us, because this was a big expedition. Could you take us to like one of the peak moments of the expedition when you're like full of awe or full of like, yes, I'm really excited that I'm doing this, because there's, obviously ups and downs throughout an expedition like this.
Yeah, definitely. I had the expedition was a total of 148 days long, and there was plenty of ups and downs throughout the whole trip. And my first moment where I really knew I wanted to be there came on day 7, and it was brought on by kind of a sad situation. But so on the expedition, it was David Midgley, and the expedition was his idea. We can talk more about that later. And then it was Don Beveridge, who's my longtime boyfriend, and me. And on day 7, Don and Midge got in a big fight, and Don told me that he wanted to quit the expedition. And him saying that, it just really all sunk in how much I had become committed to this idea. Because when I signed on to the expedition, like my main role was helping David Midgley to complete his life goal of kayaking the Amazon. So for a while, I just kind of thought of this as maybe like a job or just something that I'm helping someone else to do. But then when Don told me that he wanted to quit, I realized, no, I want to become the first woman to do this. And we had only gone like 30 miles at that point, and it had been really tough going because up at the source, the river is maybe 6 inches wide, and we did a lot of dragging of our kayaks and climbing around at 15,000 feet. So it hadn't been very glamorous, and it hadn't been very successful in terms of mileage at that point. But I just knew on day 7, I was like, this is something I have to complete.
Wow. Yeah. And so that's interesting that you noticed, wow, I'm committed to this. And maybe you don't know exactly when that shift happened, but all of a sudden, now you're taking some ownership of like, I want this experience for myself as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, is there some rule, like you have to go to where the water's a trickle and like try to drag your kayak around? Like what is the official rule up there?
So I guess, the official rule is that, there's not exactly an official rule, and geographers fight a lot about what constitutes the source and what even is the definition of source. But we were going off the definition that is the most accepted, which says the highest flowing water you can find that feeds into the main river. And so, for maybe 50 years, everyone considered the Apurimac River in Peru to be the source of the Amazon. 1 year before we started our expedition, a guy named Rocky Contos discovered that the Montaro River was actually 47 miles longer. So we shifted to the Montaro River, but then there's still about 6 different feeder streams of the Montaro. So we had to pick which one we thought was the farthest away. And then when we did that, we paddled across a lake that was about 15,000 feet in elevation. And then from the backside of the lake, the river was no longer kayakable because it was only a few inches wide, but we hiked up the mountain until the river disappeared underground, basically. So at the point, like the first point that we could see that it was actually flowing, we marked our GPS and said, this is the start of our expedition.
So you kind of also discovered the source of the Amazon, right?
Well, no. So this guy, Rocky Contos, who had realized that the Montaro was longer, he went to the source 1 year prior to us.
Okay,
wow. And so he gets full credit for discovering the source, and we just followed in his footsteps.
And what were you thinking? Like, did it feel like an important piece to go all the way up there to start?
No, it felt totally ridiculous. So we were like totally freezing cold, and you could really feel the altitude. I was pretty lucky because I grew up at about 8,000 feet, and so I do pretty well at altitude. But Don and Midge were definitely feeling like every single step they took, and we're just literally crawling around in the tundra of Peru, like, no, it's still flowing over here. And we definitely felt very silly. But at the same time, we felt like it was something we had to do to start properly.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's, and then actually going to the ending, right? It sounded like the ending, there's no like, here's the finish line of the Amazon. It's just another GPS point when you're kind of in this middle of the river. So tell us about the ending. Like, what was the ending of the trip like?
Yeah, the ending. So yeah, you're right. We felt like we were in the ocean for probably about a week before we actually got to what we considered the end. And we could see bioluminescence and the water tasted salty, and it had become blue from Atlantic Ocean water coming in and diluting the muddy Amazon River, river water, sorry. But basically what we did is we looked at Google Earth and looked at the northernmost and southernmost point of land that jutted out. And we drew a line across that point and picked a GPS point out in the middle of it that we would consider our ending. And it was sort of in a little bit of a sad way, very uncelebratory, because the conditions were really rough. It was super windy and there was huge waves, and we were in sea kayaks that weren't super stable. So we're just paddling. We've been doing this for 148 days. Like, this has been our sole goal, like our sole purpose for living. And then we just crossed this little GPS point, and the ocean was so rough that none of us could like really stop and high five or even celebrate. It was just kind of like, okay, we did it, now try to get to land. And we were about 2 miles offshore when we finished. So then we just turned and started our little battle to the beach.
Yeah. I think there's like different points when you end an expedition. If it's a trail and you finish, you like get to your stop point or your car or something, you can like celebrate right then. And then there's also maybe like I'm remembering a celebration point where like the first cooked food, like a nice cooked meal after days on the trail, and you're like, oh my gosh, this burrito is better than anything. What were some of the other moments when, as you were like reintegrating back into culture that were significant for you?
It was honestly pretty tough for me to reintegrate into culture. I'm really shy in general, and I am okay not talking to people for long periods of time, and to all of a sudden get home and have lots of people, wanting us to tell them about the expedition. It was just really overwhelming after, 5 months of not talking to anyone besides Don and Midge. And it was sort of traumatic feeling, I guess. But for me, a couple things were, so we finished our trip out at the ocean, and it took us a couple days to get back to the city of Belém, which is where we needed to fly out of. And we flew to Rio, and Midge put us up in a really nice hotel there. And I just remember taking a shower. That was like a huge thing, with warm water that was clean. So that was really awesome. And then laying down on a bed with a pillow was probably the next biggest thing for me. It was just like, oh, this feels so amazing.
Yeah, I love it. When I'm imagining like all these people, they're asking you, what's it like? Like, tell us. And at first, I think it's easy to be like, oh, it was cool. Or like, there's like no way to encapsulate such a huge trip. So what was your short version? Like when you got back and people were like, tell me about it. What was the first thing you would say about it?
I would say it was really long. Yeah, it is a hard thing. And yeah, how do you compress 148 days and all the crazy stuff that we saw and experienced into, like a 2-minute blurb that you can tell someone? And maybe that's why I had such a hard time doing it. But I kind of like to talk about the people that we met along the way. And it's funny how many people said, oh, you just kayaked the Amazon? Did that take like a week or two? And so I really did like to emphasize to some people, like, no, it really was, it's more than 4,000 miles long. It's a really long trip.
Yeah. Wow. Well, tell us about somebody that you met along the way, because who are the people that made a trip for you?
So I've always, like to think of myself as like a strong, independent, I can do everything myself kind of person. And obviously the more I get through life, the more I realize that that's not true. And the people along the Amazon just helped us so incredibly much. And we went into it being rather fearful of different spots along the river, which I think is rightfully so, because there's the red zone, for example, is where the flat water begins. And it took us about 30 days to get through this area. And then the 2 years prior to our expedition, 6 tourists had gone through there, and 2 of them were murdered and 1 more was shot, but he survived. And so we had good reason to be scared. But what I found when we actually got there is that, the people doing the murdering, the people that we were supposed to be scared of, they had their own very good reasons for being fearful of outsiders. And for me, it was really nice to get to know them a little bit. I had read a lot about them and had my own, I guess, judgments and the things I based my fear on. But it was really nice to see, no, these are just normal people just like me, and they want to be kind and friendly if they're given the opportunity to. And so that was really nice. And it was just so refreshing to see. People were sort of monetarily poor. A lot of people didn't have a lot of money, but they had food, they had shelter. And it was amazing how kind they were to us. Oh, you're on this long kayaking expedition. Do you want some mangoes? Do you want some papayas? And they were just really willing to give anything that they had, which was cool to see. I think sometimes in our culture, we get sort of annoyed by strangers sometimes, or, we want to keep what's ours and not share so much. But these guys were all just so willing to, camp on our beach, eat whatever you want. How can we help you? And that was really nice to see.
I'm curious about, so how did you get over the fear of Murderville? Actually, I live in St. Louis, and there's actually a lot of murders here, and it's kind of interesting to drive through. I can see on the map murders happen on this block, and to drive down that block and be okay, wow. So what was it like? How did you come to the point where you were seeing them for who they were rather than just scary people?
It was definitely difficult to get to that point. And before we started paddling, we spent a fair amount of time arranging permission letters there's an indigenous group there called the Ashaninka, and they have an overriding body that issues permission letters to travel through their area. And the main point of these are to notify them who we are, what we're doing, and to show them that we're not a threat, because part of the reason that they do murder people and are so afraid of outsiders is that basically since the 1800s, every single person that's come into their territory has wanted to take something from them or kill them. And this includes, up to the present day, the Shining Path was really active in this area, and there still are Shining Path people there. This region is now the #1 cocaine producing region of the world. They overtook Colombia in 2013. There's tons of illegal logging, and there's just they really are facing a lot of threats to their territory, to their way of life. So the permission letters were a first step, and we talked to a woman named Ruth Buendia, who was sort of the organizer of all of this. But that didn't necessarily make me feel better, because she, basically said it's still a bad idea to travel through this area, but if you have to do it, here's some permission letters for you. And I spent, we got to this area on the 25th day of our expedition, and I spent those 25 days debating whether it was worth it or not, because I could just finish the whitewater. That's what David Midgley really needed the most help with, and then leave and not risk my life in the red zone. So I was really debating, is becoming the first woman to kayak the Amazon really worth this risk of death? And I was trying to assess how serious a threat it really was and how much it was just being played up. I ended up cutting off all my hair, way shorter than your hair is right now, because I wanted our team to look like 3 dudes instead of 2 guys and a woman. I thought that just might help our safety chances a little bit better. And then I just eventually put off the decision so long that we got there, and I hadn't really decided. But immediately upon getting there, we had a little village where we got our sea kayaks delivered, and everyone in this village was so friendly and were so helpful, and they're so kind. And kind of the only traffic we saw on the river at that point was dugout motorized canoes full of school kids that were traveling home from school. And so that first day I was like, oh, this doesn't seem that bad. Everyone's super friendly and nice. And a couple more days down the river, things started to get a little scarier. We got more warnings from locals, but still every person that we actually talked to was really kind. And so I think just as, day by day we went down the river, even though we still heard of these threats, our actual experiences with the people were just very reassuring, I guess. So.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you kept putting off making this decision, and then even during the red zone time, you were like taking it day by day. Did you have the potential to get out of there if you needed to?
Yeah, it definitely would have been possible on the red zone because at that point, there's tons of motorized canoe traffic. So, I mean, I guess it would have depended on flagging down a canoe, paying them to take us to a town that did have road access and getting out. So it wouldn't necessarily have guaranteed our safety because we still would have had to travel through some dangerous zones if we had decided to get out. But yeah, my hope when I started out was that I would make the decision before I got to the red zone and could get out somewhere that wasn't dangerous. But I just, let myself down on that plan.
So I want to dig into decision making because obviously you also made the decision to start this trip in the first place. I know you were invited by Midge, and then eventually it became like you took some ownership, like this is my trip as well. But how did you decide to undertake the trip in the first place?
Well, this is sort of funny and was a source of conflict between me and Dawn because I am a really sort of rash decision maker. And if something sounds good to me, I just say yes. And in a lot of ways, I think that's a good thing. It's opened a lot of doors for me in life, and just being willing to dive in without knowing a ton and just say yes to opportunities has, on the one hand, been really helpful. But on the other hand, there's very obvious reasons that this could be a bad idea with just diving in without knowing much about it. And Don is a very, very meticulous decision maker, and he thinks everything through and weighs every option kind of as thoroughly as he possibly can. And so we both find each other very annoying when we're trying to make decisions together because our methods are so different. But yeah, right when Midge invited me, he actually just invited Don and I for the whitewater to begin with, and it was just an easy yes. Whitewater kayaking had been my career and my hobby for, almost 2 decades at that point. And so that was an easy yes. And then one night, Dawn just said, hey, are you really going to be okay leaving after the whitewater? And then that means you'll be walking away from a chance to become the first woman to do the whole Amazon. And I was like, oh, well, I hadn't really considered that, but you're right. Like, let's do the whole thing. And so from the moment Dawn said that, I was just 100% on board. And then he tried to backpedal a lot. He's like, whoa, you need to think this through. Well, this is going to entail a lot more. And but then once I had decided that, I started doing research and learning more about the threats. But I guess for some reason, like the pull or the draw of the adventure had already taken strong enough hold of me that I was able to take each threat and say, like, I think we can deal with that in a way that will have a positive outcome. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe a combination of our decision-making methods worked out well here because I just committed us to it and said yes right away. And then through Dawn's encouragement, did a lot of research. And yeah, I guess we just decided, with the minor exception of the red zone, we felt like we could mitigate all the risks down to a level that were acceptable for us.
I really like people like you that say yes so quickly. It makes it. There's this rule in comedy improv where you yes and it's so fun to have a yes ander, and super important to have someone who then like bails you out by knowing and being super prepared. The Boy Scout motto, be prepared.
Exactly. I think we're a good team in that regard.
Yeah.
Good balance for each other.
Can you talk a little bit about where your life was, the situation of your life? Because I know you had sort of like, you had a business and you had just sold it and weren't doing that. So what situation did you find yourself in right before this trip? Yeah,
it was sort of a really interesting convergence of Different personalities. So I was in a point, I was 34 years old when Midge asked me to go. I guess maybe, yeah, 34. And I really loved what I was doing. I owned a business called Small World Adventures, running whitewater kayaking trips in Ecuador, and did a lot of traveling for kayaking for fun during the summers. And I really enjoyed my life, but I was getting to the point in my mid 30s where people more and more were sort of challenging my life choices by saying, when are you and Dawn going to get married? When are you going to settle down, have some kids? Don't you worry about your security for the future? And so I was kind of getting a lot of that. And then Midge, he's a brilliant computer programmer who kind of had all these things in life that you're supposed to have, but he wanted to make sure he wanted one big adventure in life so that he didn't feel like he had wasted his entire life writing code in front of a computer. And then right about the same time, a really brilliant hardware engineer from Apple came to Ecuador as one of our clients. And he was also looking to escape sort of the life that I was feeling pressured into. And he decided he wanted to buy our business, and it wasn't for sale, but he just said, I really want to change my life. I think buying this business is a great way to do it. And so at that point there was 3 partners, me, Dawn, and a guy named Larry Vermeuren. And we decided, wow, somebody actually wants to buy this business. We better say yes and sell it. But we all, yeah, we all really still liked it. So the plan was to keep working for the new owner. But it quickly, in the first year, became apparent that our business styles were just too different. And so after that first year, I had a bit of a confrontation with the new owner, and he ended up firing me and also just Dawn because he kind of thought of us as a package deal. So that happened in March of the year that we did the Amazon expedition. And so, yeah, as we started off on this expedition, we were really kind of at a starting over point, and Don was not too stoked because I had gotten him fired. And yeah, we sort of knew this before, but once we lost the business, we really realized how much it meant to us in terms of, that was kind of our identity. It was our purpose. And we always have been very mobile, but Ecuador was the most home, I guess, that we've ever had.
And do you have the business back now? Are you doing it again?
Yeah, so the life swapping didn't work out for any of us. So in 2016, Don and I bought the business back.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we got to go back to our kayaking life. The guy that bought it from us got to go back to his engineering life, and now we're all back where we're supposed to be.
Well, that's super cool.
Experiment.
Because most people, I think, wouldn't undertake such an experiment, and which shows you can go back. You could, if you didn't get to buy your company back, you could have started a different one or something similar. And there's a lot of these potential to unwind the tape or sort of reset.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we did end up actually starting a new guiding business. We had a total of 3 years off from Small World Adventures. And we did the Amazon in the first 6 months. And then for about another 6 months, we tried to, we rented an apartment. We tried to get sort of steady jobs. And we just didn't like it that much. And so we ended up starting another adventure travel company. And it was not too long after we did our first trip with that new company that we thought, hey, let's just ask if he's enjoying Small World or if he wants to give it back. And he was pretty happy to jump on the opportunity to give it back to us. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do people still ask you the questions that they were asking you, when are you going to get married or when are you going to grow up? Is that still a thing that people are asking you?
A little bit. I think, I've been trying to think about this lately. It feels to me that that's happening less so, but I'm not sure if it's actually happening less or if I'm just worrying about it less. Because part of this whole process for me was just trying to force myself to be comfortable with my life because I am happy about it. And my only unhappiness from my life choices stems from what I perceive to be other people's judgments of it. And so I've been making a real effort to not worry about them. And yeah, so I think it's still there a little bit, but I'm not hearing it as much, maybe.
And so, I think all people have times in their lives where they like did the thing they wanted, and sometimes we give in to like what is expected or a story or a script. So what is it that has allowed you to keep choosing what you want to do versus what other people are expecting of you?
I think the main thing is I just really prioritize my own happiness, and I can see, even when I have really short periods, maybe like a week or 2 weeks of not getting outside, not kayaking, not doing what I want to do, just how much it affects my enjoyment of life. And so I've had maybe 5 serious times in my life when I've seriously contemplated, going back to school, retraining, and figuring out like a real career in quotation bunny ears. And every time I've done that, what I come up with, it's not driven by any kind of passion at all. It's just driven by, oh, I could do this. This is something that my skill set and my personality would mesh with. So this is an option. But I just never get very far because I just quickly realize that if my heart's not in it, I'm just going to be miserable the whole time. And what purpose is that going to serve?
What, where do you get your drive from? Internal or external, or where does it come from for you?
I think it's pretty internal. Yeah, that's a good question. It's pretty internal, I think. Yeah, I like to be moving all the time. I like to constantly have projects and things to do. And I definitely, if I have 5 minutes of downtime, I think, okay, now what can I plan next?
What was it like growing up? I know you grew up in Aspen, and I think there was a part in the book where your first like big international trip to Nepal, maybe I think it was, and your parents were like, "Go for it." How were they supportive of you just sort of like doing all these adventures throughout your life?
Yeah, I've been super lucky in that regard, is that my parents have been, I'd say 95% supportive. And they kind of get it. They met at University of Nevada in Reno, and they were ski bums and ski reps and traveled around the country skiing. So they kind of get that side of it. And they decided ultimately to settle down and have a family. And they ended up starting a ski clothing business called Boulder Gear. And so they, kind of did the traditional thing. But yeah, they've always been quite supportive of me doing what I want. And their motto is, as long as I'm happy and can support myself, they don't care what I do. I think they're definitely disappointed that they don't have any grandchildren, but they'll get over that, I think.
And what was maybe you could just sort of talk us through like what was it like at the dinner table growing up?
Growing up. So yeah, that's an interesting question. So my parents moved to Aspen because, again, they wanted to be ski bums, and my dad was a ski patroller at Aspen Highlands, and my mom worked at restaurants on the ski hill. And so then I have one younger sister, and she's very athletic, but that's not like the focus of her life. And so we always had some funny fights around the dinner table because I'd always want to go skiing on the weekends, and she wouldn't want to go skiing on the weekends. And my parents were like, I just want you both to shut up and leave us alone all the time. No, I'm just kidding about that. But they, they were great. Like, we both did sports in high school, and they always supported us, what we wanted to do. And of course, they made us do our homework and our chores, but they left us a lot of latitude to kind of discover what we wanted out of life and didn't try to push us into the things that they liked in life.
Let's talk a little bit about identity. And, I got this sense from your book that you're talking about how you're short, but then you were a really good volleyball player, perhaps an All-American, or you set a bunch of records for someone like normally normally you were kind of breaking the mold as like a short person who could jump really high.
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk about like how, like, what was your identity sort of growing up and in college, and has that changed, and did this trip change? And maybe you could just talk about like the shifting of your the way you see yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's sort of funny. I was recently cleaning out boxes of old stuff, and I had a volleyball roster from my freshman year of high school, and I was 5 feet tall and weighed 82 pounds. And I just really laughed when I read that, because when I was a kid, I definitely did not see myself that way. You know, I had done sports all my life, and I just thought of myself as this athlete and like just as big and capable as anybody else. But in high school, it was a real kind of eye-opener of seeing how other people saw me. And a lot of my coaches didn't believe in me and kind of said, that's cute that you want to play volleyball and basketball, but don't try too hard because nothing's going to come of it. And so I got really frustrated, and a lot of my early motivation was coming from kind of an unpure place, because I sort of got this chip on my shoulder, and I just really wanted to prove all of them wrong. That was sort of my number one motivator in high school. And it wasn't that great, because it left me kind of angry all the time. And if I made one mistake, I would feel like, oh, that's just showing them that they're right. Like, you've got to work harder and be perfect just to show them that they're wrong. And so, yeah, that wasn't so great. But then, I spent my first 2 years of college at Skidmore College in New York playing volleyball. And I had a really amazing coach there named Hilda, who really did believe in me and saw the potential and helped me become as good as I could be. And that was a really great experience, just in terms of boosting my confidence and realizing like I could find people out there that believed in me. And so, yeah, that was kind of one shifting point. And then after I had 2 successful seasons at Skidmore, I realized that there was more important things to me. I really missed skiing. I missed sort of the outdoor culture. I didn't fit in very well with the other students at Skidmore. And so I transferred to Montana State after a year and a half. And
go Bobcats.
Yeah, it was kind of, yeah, exactly. And that was a really great shift for me. I actually ended up getting way more into school when I transferred there too, because I could really identify with my professors more. You know, like, they were really smart people, but they also mountain biked, and so I could maybe see a little bit of myself in them and was motivated to work harder for them. And then that's when I got into kayaking, and I kind of hated kayaking at first because I really sucked at it, and I hadn't really been bad at anything up to that point in my life, like athletic wise, and I really was bad at kayaking, and I just found that so annoying. But once I sort of struggled through that initial learning curve, I started traveling to kayak, and that just opened my world so much. You know, I had not really I'd been in Aspen my whole life, went to school in New York and then Montana. And then when I started traveling, I just realized how much more was out there, and began to be more motivated, like, not just to prove people wrong, but to discover stuff about the world and about myself, and challenge myself just to see what I could do rather than to prove to this person or that person what I could do.
Yeah. No, thank you for taking us through that. It's it's an important shift, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm curious, like, what led you to stick with kayaking if it was kind of annoyingly difficult at first?
Yeah, I've asked myself that question a lot. And so the way I learned to kayak was after I graduated high school. I was out looking for a summer job, and I wasn't super creative at that point, and I just knew I wanted an outside job. The only thing I could think of was landscaping. So I was out like applying to landscaping companies, and I ran into an old track coach of mine who said, oh, well, we're hiring for raft guides this weekend, and that would be way more fun than landscaping. So I got a job raft guiding, and all the raft guides were kayakers. And I was like this 18-year-old super shy girl, and then all these raft guides were like 25 and 30, and I just thought they were like the coolest people in the world. And so they would let me go kayaking with them, and maybe I just kept at it because I wanted to keep hanging out with them, or I honestly don't know, but I really like some of the people teaching me had been kayaking 7 years. And I just remember thinking like, I can't wait till I've been kayaking 7 years because then I'll be better and this won't suck as bad.
Wow.
But yeah, mainly I finally, for the first year of kayaking, I didn't know how to roll. So that, basically every time I would tip over, I would have to swim out of my kayak. So I didn't want to try anything like surfing or try to get better because I was just afraid I would swim. And then after that first year, I went to a pool and spent like 37 hours in the pool learning how to roll. And that was a lot better after that. I really started to enjoy it more after that.
Wow. Yeah. I'm in the process of learning a basic bicycling skill, which I never got as a kid, but it's to ride a wheelie. And it's taken, so far I've probably spent 18 hours doing it, and I can only do it, an hour at a time before I start to get sore and tired and stuff. So 37 hours of learning this one skill. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the progression and like, how did you chunk it down? And
Okay. Yeah. So it wasn't 37 hours straight, but, yeah, so I was kayaking with these guys who were happy to let me go with them, but were not overly enthusiastic about teaching me much. And after a summer of swimming, I thought I just have to learn to roll if I want to keep going. So I went to visit a friend in Arizona who had a swimming pool in her condo complex, and she worked mornings. And so I would spend like 6 hours a day in her pool while she was at work. And yeah, I had like a couple guys give me some basic tips on how to do it, but I really didn't know what I was doing. But I eventually figured it out after lots of swimming in the pool. But that was obviously a lot easier. But yeah, I think I was at her house 7 days and about 6 hours every morning in the pool. But by the time I was done, I could roll on both sides, hand roll on both sides. And yeah, it was just one of those things. Like I was saying, like now I really love things that challenge myself and things that I can overcome. And this was maybe like the first significant one because I didn't really know what I was doing going into it. I had no idea if I would figure it out or succeed in doing it, but I just put in the work. And afterwards, it was a ton of work, and it sucks to sit in the pool for 6 hours a day. But afterwards, I felt so good. I was like, okay, you can do stuff like this. You just have to work hard.
And now you've done these really big challenges, like writing a book and running the Amazon, the full length. Like those are some pretty hefty long-term things. Actually, could you compare those two challenges, the book and the expedition?
Yeah, the book was far more challenging for me because it was so outside of my normal wheelhouse. So the kayaking the Amazon, I was really good at whitewater kayaking, but only 25 days of the Amazon was whitewater and the rest was flat water. So there was definitely some new challenges, new mental and emotional challenges on a trip that long. So that's by far the longest expedition I've ever done. But it all sort of felt within my realm of possibilities. The book writing was completely new for me, and including the process of writing a query letter to get a literary agent. I didn't even know that literary agents existed when I started the process. And, writing the proposal. And, yeah, it took me about 6 years from start to publishing date. And there was tons of rejections, like trying to find a literary agent. And then even after I had a literary agent, tons of rejections from publishers. Tons of rewriting, but again, it was one of those things like rolling. This obviously took a lot longer, but compared to the first draft of my book, I'm so happy with how the final product turned out. And I can see, sometimes it was kind of bad when I was right in the middle of the process and thinking like, I'm just wasting my time. No one's ever going to publish this or read this. But to see the final product now, I feel like those 6 years of hard work paid off.
So 6 years to write the book. The expedition was 7 years ago. So pretty soon afterwards, you decided it should be a book. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And before we went on the expedition, I kind of thought to myself, like, oh, if we succeed, this will be something worthy of writing a book about. So I kept a journal. I kept notes the whole way, thinking that I might do it. And then, yeah, I started writing about 6 months after we got back. And it was definitely a slow process at the beginning because I had other jobs and wasn't fully committed to it yet. I just was sort of testing the waters to see how the writing would go. And then I ended up taking an online writing class because a friend of mine, or a friend's wife, read a chapter really early on. And basically, she didn't say this, but she implied, this is horrible and you'll never get anywhere. Take this class. It might help. And she was right. And the class was really helpful, including there was a component of it to write a proposal and all that kind of stuff. And then after I finished that class, I began to feel like it was something that maybe I could accomplish. So I started scheduling summers, like at least 3 months of summer off so that I could focus on writing the book. And yeah, it just came together eventually.
Yeah, it's super super cool, unique. Would you say that the like the tone or the style, like, did it shift a few times as you were writing it? Could you talk about that?
Hugely, because I am a fairly introspective person, but I really hate sharing my introspection with other people. And so this was obviously a problem, writing a book. And the first drafts of the book were very much like, oh, we woke up, we ate breakfast, and we went kayaking, the very boring details of the expedition. And then, basically everyone who read some was like, you need to put yourself in this story. And I really resisted against that for a long time. But as soon as I started to do it, I immediately realized how much better it made the overall story. And so, once it was like torture to get me to start. But once I started, I found getting into it was pretty easy.
And was that outside feedback of people telling you like, yes, this is the right thing, or you could tell yourself that it was the right tone?
Well, so interestingly enough, a lot of people said like, you need to make this book more like Wild. That was like the overwhelming comment that I got. And I'm just thinking to myself like, well, my mom hasn't died yet. I wasn't addicted to heroin. I can't make my story like Wild. And so it took me a lot of thinking to think like, what about my life could people relate to? Because obviously not that many people can relate to kayaking the Amazon, and they shouldn't want to, so that's a good thing. But, so that was kind of a challenge to think of what could people relate to. But once I kind of thought about these struggles about trying to fit into society or trying to be comfortable not fitting into society, I just realized that a lot of people could relate to that. Even if they are doing everything they're supposed to be and fitting the mold, I'm sure there's part of them that wishes they didn't, or they're doing something that's kind of out of the ordinary that they might be getting some bad feedback about. And so once I came up with that idea, it felt pretty good. And to answer your question, it felt right to me. And I also got feedback that like, yeah, this was a good message.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And do you have a message for people that are listening right now that are kind of struggling with and I think a lot of people they're in quarantine as we record this, we're sort of, our city's in lockdown. People are evaluating, who am I? Is this the life track that I want? Is this are these the people around me that, so many different situations, like, is this the internal monologue that I want? What advice or what message do you want to share with people that are sort of weighing here's what I know is true about what I want, and here's what the world sort of expects from me? What would you say to people?
I guess a couple things on that. One, if you know what you want, I think you should consider yourself really lucky, because there's so many people out there that don't exactly know what they want, or they're struggling to figure it out. And if you're one of those people in that struggle, like, keep struggling, because I think everybody can figure it out eventually. It just, sometimes takes 30, 40, 50, 60 years to get it right. But I think really asking yourself, what do I want, is super important. And I think a lot of people don't ask that question. They ask, like, what does my husband want? What does my wife want? What does society want of me? And so start, number one, by asking what you want. And if you can figure that out, it's just so worthwhile to chase after it. And I know it can be super hard to not to do what you're supposed to do. And both from the perspective of having outside pressure, because even if, I like to think of myself as someone who doesn't really care what others think, but I really realized through this process that I do care because it affects me when people sort of question my lifestyle. But I also realized that a ton of my pressure to conform is sort of coming from inside because I feel weird or bad that I'm taking this alternative path. But just really working hard on finding peace with what you want to do and chasing after it, I think is going to be the most fulfilling way to go through life. Because if you do everything you're supposed to do, and then at the end of the day realize you didn't do one thing that you wanted, it's not going to make for a very happy or fulfilling life. And I think at the end of the line, if I can say, like, I followed my true path, even though I maybe let others down, because I didn't do what they expected I would do, I think I'll be happier for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And there's something in there around, I think it's so true because some people say, like, well, maybe I don't really know what I want or haven't found it yet. And I think, we as adventurers or explorers, like, we're constantly getting these inputs. And so like you discovered kayaking, like, oh, I actually want to do that. But there's no way you would have known that you like this or you want more of that until you had tried it. And so there's just there's a certain, like, almost, you just need to sample a bunch of things and you can sort of move closer. You're like, I kind of like this, but then you try something else and you're actually like that more. And so it can take some time and sampling to find, oh, now I don't like this, or I don't like people like this, or I don't like activities, or I do like these things. So it's almost a numbers game at some point to find the things that you actually want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where coming back to this idea of saying yes comes in really handy, because a lot of the events that have steered the course of my life weren't my ideas. There's just things that I said yes to, and it opened up this whole other world of possibilities to me. And so I think for people that are still searching for what they want, it's like, just say yes. And like you said, try a bunch of different things and see what fits.
Yeah. I don't want to go through our whole interview without like a great Amazon story. And, maybe you could talk about, like, was there a situation, what was like the hairiest situation when there's like, maybe like no good decision you could make, or you just felt your life was actually threatened, or could you talk about like one of the tightest moments?
Yeah, for me, the scariest moment was in the Whitewater, and we got to a construction site where they're building a new dam on the Montaro River. And we knew that the site was there, and we had met with the project manager before we left to get him to stop the dynamite work before we traveled through. And so, we were prepared. We were prepared for it, but we had no idea how bad it would actually be. So we get to the start of this canyon, we get out the satellite phone and call to let them know that we had arrived and could they please stop dynamiting. And they gave us a 2.5-hour window to get through it. And it was only 3-mile long canyon, so we thought that would be plenty of time. But their work they'd been working for a little over a year, and the cliff walls here were between like 1,000 and 1,500 feet deep.
Wow.
And they were like dynamiting huge rocks off the top, basically building a road down to the river to access it. And so there was like school bus size and house size boulders that had fallen into the river. And so a lot of the rapids were just completely unrunnable because the water was going underneath the rocks instead of over them like it does in a natural riverbed. So we had to do a lot of really challenging portages. The first one, we basically had to like climb up a cliff and haul the boats up and get around this rapid. And it ended up taking us, like, can't exactly remember, almost 5 hours to get through this canyon. And after about 3.5 hours, we still hadn't even seen a single worker because they were working so high up. And So I was really concerned that they would start dynamiting again because they might assume that we had passed because our time ran out. And even if they didn't start dynamiting, like all the shore on both sides was just these super unstable, like scree and sand piles. So when we had to portage, we were sort of walking at this base of a massive landslide, just wondering, like, is one step going to trigger it in motion again? And I was kind of angry at myself at that point because, yeah, once we were in the canyon, there was no way out besides just continuing downstream. But I really thought to myself, like, how did you let yourself get into this situation? This is so stupid because, like, on a normal river, like, I totally understand the threats and the dangers of class 5, and I definitely feel like I can deal with them in a good way, a way that feels safe and reasonable to me. But this felt completely different because there's so many factors out of our control. Like, were the workers going to start blasting again? Would we trigger a landslide? Midge actually did make a mistake and fell into a hydraulic at one point. And yeah, thankfully he got out and stayed in his kayak and rolled up. But if he had swam, it was almost like 2 miles of class 6 whitewater afterwards, and he almost certainly would have drowned. And so we felt really lucky to come through that one alive.
Did you ever get a sense in this instance, or maybe others, that there was like a higher power or some sort of like divine influence that let you come through it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's weird. In this situation that I was just talking about, when Midge dropped into this hydraulic, which for people that aren't kayakers, a hydraulic is where the river pours over a rock and then starts reversing back on itself. So the water's not flowing downstream anymore. It's actually flowing back upstream. And this thing was huge. It was probably the size of like a UPS delivery van. And I passed by it right while Midge was getting stuck in it. And I just thought, that is one of the biggest holes I've ever seen. Like, there's no way he's going to get out of this thing. And his kayak was 8 feet long, and it's just like doing loops end over end. And I really thought, I mean, literally as I passed him, I thought, what are we going to tell his girlfriend? Like, because he's going to die right now.
Wow.
And then, like, the next second, like, really when he should have kind of got sucked into the meatiest, the deepest part of the hole, it just spit him out. And that was definitely a moment of like, wow, someone is watching out for Midge right now.
Yeah. Wow. What's your relationship with danger and death and mortality? Like, because you place yourself in these potentially, and particularly, I think you highlight in the book, like if you don't have the skills, it's much more dangerous, but you do have quite a good skill set. What's your relationship with doing this like potentially lethal sport?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question, actually, because I think a lot of people think that kayaking is a crazy sport, or kind of any extreme adventure sports. I think it's easy to look upon them and think like, oh, those people doing them just have a death wish. But yeah, I definitely don't feel that way. And I actually get more nervous like doing a big road trip than I do kayaking a class 5 river, because on a river, like, so now I've been kayaking 23 years, and I have just a ton of experience kayaking all over the world on like 400 different rivers around the world. And even though every river is different, and even though rapids can be chaotic and sometimes unpredictable, it's like, it feels like a force of nature that I'm very, very comfortable with. I know a lot about it at this point. I have a lot of experience with it. And so I definitely get nervous, and I like that because it causes me to focus a lot. And you talked on one of your earlier podcasts with Ashley about the flow state, getting to the flow state, and kayaking for me is a really awesome way to get to that state of mind, get in the zone where I can have full concentration and sort of nothing else matters. But in terms of like my relationship with death, I don't want to die. I hope that I never die kayaking, although it is a risk that I accept. But the way that I approach it, and my experience, I'm pretty cautious. I'm a pretty conservative kayaker overall. I do feel like I probably have a higher risk of dying in a car accident than I do kayaking. I don't know if that answered the question very well, but
No, I think it's from the outside, right? If you look at anybody who's highly skilled, and I'm thinking of big wave surfing right now. They surf a 50-foot wave, and you're like, that's impossible. But the day before, they surfed a 45-foot wave, and so the difference for them is just like a fraction of a bit harder than the day before, and that's what most people's careers are like. Like each day, maybe you like do something that's a little bit more challenging. You take on a little more responsibility, and so in that sense, it's actually not a huge jump, right, to do a class 5 rapid because you've been doing it for so long.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it would be one thing just to start kayaking one day and the next day to do class 5. That would be a bad progression. But one thing I like, or sort of an analogy I like, when I first started kayaking, a friend took me to the North Fork Payette River, which is kind of a famous class 5 run. And we got to I wasn't kayaking, we were just driving along the road. And he took me to the hardest rapid. And I remember looking at it and thinking, there's no way I will ever kayak that rapid. I just do not see a way I could possibly survive. And then like a few years later, I came back and I looked at the rapid and I saw a line. And I thought, oh, I can definitely make that line. And so it's not like I was running this impossible rapid. If I had run it that first year, it would have been an impossible rapid. But I had waited till my skills built up, and then all of a sudden it was very reasonable. It was very doable. I could see clearly how it was going to work out. And yeah, I think that's been like a perfect guiding principle for my progression. It's like, if I can't see it, don't do it. And yeah. I think that's helped keep me safe.
What's bringing up for me is the first time I did like a double black chute run, like where like between like big cliffs, and just like getting over the edge, and then being like, I can handle that, and it's this weird feeling of like all of a sudden this majorly intimidating thing, and then you do it, and you're in the moment of it, and you're doing it, and you're like, wow, I can actually do this. Super
yeah,
cool.
Exactly. It is an awesome feeling.
What's the guy that the Midge fella whose idea it was for this expedition? He was not a kayaker, and he basically like turned himself into an expedition level kayaker. What was it like to watch him progress, through his capabilities?
Yeah, it was really cool to watch him, actually. When he first, so we met him because he came to Ecuador to start kayaking with Small World Adventures so that we could teach him and train him to become a class 5 kayaker. And the first year that he got there, he was not good. He didn't, seem particularly athletic or honestly even particularly like driven for this goal. Like he was a smoker and he drank a lot, and I just kind of thought, like, this guy's never going to do it. And then, the more he came back, the more, number one, we realized how serious he was. And this is just a funny, quick side story. I am, like, really technologically in the dark ages, and I'm not very good at it. But at one point, Midge and I made a deal when he left Ecuador for the season that he would quit smoking if I got a Facebook account for Small World Adventures. And so we shook on it, we made a deal, and we both upheld our end of the bargain. And I remember at that point thinking like, oh, he really quit smoking. So this is cool. This is a cool step, and he's going to do this. And it was really fun to watch him progress. And I would say it's pretty amazing because to be a class 5 expedition kayaker is a really hard thing to do. And even some really dedicated kayakers. Midge was a computer programmer, a brilliant computer programmer who wanted to become a kayaker for this specific reason. There's people out there that dedicate their entire lives to kayaking, and they can never get to the class 5 level that Midge needed to be at. And so that he was able to do it really speaks a lot to his drive and his dedication. And, to this day, I've never met someone that came from a position of being so unprepared like Midge was, comes up with this totally crazy goal and actually follows through on it. And yeah, it took him 10 years of training altogether, but he was so driven to make it happen, and he stuck with it. And yeah, I'm just really so proud of him. It's so cool that he did that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, to think It's a 10-year long quest. It's just beyond most people's conception of what they could even do. I mean, if you look at yourself, anybody listening, if they look at themselves 10 years ago, right? You've come so far, you've learned so many things. But this guy had an intent behind it for 10 years. Wow.
Yeah. And it's kind of a good lesson. It's like, honestly, well, Midge would probably be okay with me saying this, but if Midge could do something like this, anybody can do what they want to do. I mean, he was just such an unlikely person to kayak the Amazon from source to sea, and he knew that too. But yeah, he just did it, and he did some really funny things. Like, he didn't have a driver's license before this, and then he realized if he wanted to be a kayaker, he'd have to drive his kayak to the river. So when he was 32 years old, he got a driver's license. He thought kayaking was very scary when he started, so he's also afraid of heights, so he took up skydiving so that he could have something in his life scarier than kayaking, to kind of put it and make it all relative, so to speak. And
super strategic. Wow.
Yeah, definitely.
This is I want to there's one more story I want to get before we wrap here. And your first time going on one of these international kayak trips to Nepal, is that correct? Is that where you went? Could you talk a little bit about what that trip did for you in terms of changing your life trajectory? Yeah,
so this was another example of me just saying yes. I had been kayaking about 1 year at this point, and I had just transferred to Montana State. And I met this guy named Adam, who I didn't know very well at all, but he's like, hey, you want to skip fall semester and come kayaking in Nepal with me? And I was like, yeah, why not? Obviously didn't think it through very well. And he was a very good kayaker, and I obviously was not. But I said yes, and I went. And it was a really hard trip. It was the first time I'd ever left North America. And I just wasn't really prepared for life in Nepal, I guess. And so everything was crazy and new and challenging, and I was like sick to my stomach for most of the 6 weeks that I was there. Ugh. I was kayaking stuff that was too hard for me, but because of my pool sessions, I was really good at rolling by that point, but I didn't have many other skills, so I'd literally like tip over like 50 or 100 times per day and just roll back up. And
sounds exhausting.
It was exhausting. And then kind of the pinnacle of the badness of the trip was we went and did a class 5 river, which I was definitely not good enough to do. And I swam in one of the first hard rapids. And I lost my toothbrush, but luckily I didn't lose anything else. But we camped out. Like, everything I had was soaking wet. Camped out in the jungle, had a freezing night, and then decided that I needed to bail because I wasn't going to make it through the rest of this river. And I was like climbing up this near cliff to get to the road, and like hand over hand. And then I stuck my hand in a human poop and keep climbing up to the road, and then just sitting on the side of the road, like waiting for a bus. And it took us 18-hour bus ride to get back to Kathmandu before we could like shower or clean up. And like, in a lot of ways, it was definitely a low point in my life up to that point. But at the same time, some weird part of my brain was just like, I need to get better at kayaking so I can have successful adventures like this.
Wow.
And I didn't really have a travel bug before that. And I had a funny thought growing up that I never needed to leave Aspen. I would just go be a ski patroller like my dad had been. And after that trip to Nepal, I just threw my prior life plan out the window, and all I wanted to do was, work to save enough money and then go travel to kayak, and then come back and work, save money, and go spend it all again. And it's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 20 years now.
Amazing. You can't get enough of the climbing out of a dangerous situation, touching human poop. Wow.
Things have gotten a lot better since that point.
What? How would you like to wrap this conversation? Is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to share? You think is important about this journey or the book? Or
I might go back really quickly to your question about like how I look at death and mortality and stuff like that. And I was just thinking a little bit more about it while we were talking. And one thing about my personality is I always like there to be some element of challenging. And even if I can't get that through kayaking, I like to manufacture not life-threatening situations, but situations where I feel in my brain like, okay, you have to work hard to come out of this okay. And for me, when I'm creating challenges and overcoming them is when I feel kind of the most alive, the most satisfied. And it doesn't even have to be anything big. It can just be like, I need to go summit that mountain in my backyard today, and I don't know if there's a trail, and like silly little things like that. But I love, manufacturing these cool challenges in my life. And I guess as a way of wrapping up for anyone that's listening, I just really, like we talked about earlier, encourage you to figure out what it is that you want and chase after it at all costs.
Amazing. Darcy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you, your business, your book online? What's the best place to find you?
So it's challenging because my last name is so hard to spell, but they can go to my website, which is darcygaechter.com, and it's DarcyGaechter.com. I'm also on Instagram, and the business is called Small World Adventures. You can check us out on our website or on Instagram as well.
Brilliant. Well, that was a really fun conversation. Appreciate